Alright, much better. Let's take a look at how we can fit all these components inside the jack and solder it together. I'm all set for soldering here. My welder's on at about 750 degrees, and I've got it on the standard ETA 16th inch tip. Got some 6040 rosin core solder, some helping hands, various other pliers, strippers, things like that in case I need them. These wires have a tendency just to keep on splitting, so I'm going to go ahead and feed a piece of 3/8 inch heat shrink over them. You got to do this now before you put the jack on, or you'll never be able to do it later. It's right there. Just going to go ahead and use a lighter. You can use a heat gun if you've got one, but this should work. I'm going to be using this 1/4 inch mono female jack. It's got a nice amount of space in here which I can fit the components. If you like, you could try to use a male jack, and just as long as you have room in there. I like the female jack also because you have more flexibility with running a longer cable out to your guitar. Now it's important to visualize how your parts are going to fit together. You can see I sort of did a little drawing here, and I'm going to try to fit the JFET in here just underneath the pins. So in that little space right there, I'm going to fit the JFET underneath it, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and put a little solder pad down there. This will make it easier later to solder the ground wire down here to the shield, since it'll be hard to reach once the JFET's in there. Now, since everything needs to fit into such a small space, you need to trim a lot of the leads to be as short as possible so that they take up the least amount of space. I'm going to take the two Zehners and trim their leads to be very short, and then just solder them back to back with their leads facing away from each other like this. Now these leads get extremely hot when soldering, so it's a good idea to use the helping hands or locking pliers or something to hold them in place so that when you get the heat on them, your fingers don't get burnt. And when working with transistors, always double check your data sheets for the pinouts. I wrote these down backwards. It's gate, source, drain with the flat side down. I cut the source and drain pins to be a little shorter here so that when I attach the resistors, in this case I'm going to do the 1.2K resistor, it won't take up too much space within the jack. So I'm going to just use the helping hands to position it just the right place and apply some heat. Get on there on and off as quickly as possible. Now because these pins are pretty close together, I'm going to go ahead and take a little piece of 16th inch heat shrink and actually just cover this right up. Just give it a little bit of heat so that it conforms over the resistor. So that way the adjacent pins I don't need to worry about shorting. So that's the 1.2K ohm resistor on the source. I'm going to try to position this in the jack. See how it's going to fit. I'd like to attach the gate pin here directly to one of the jack's lugs here. Those two lugs are electrically connected. I'm not sure why they gave us two. So what I'm doing is just grabbing the gate pin here, folding it over so that it's right over that lug. Next we need to connect the 1 meg ohm resistor and Zehners to ground from the gate. Now it's a good idea to attach these together in advance so that you can work with them just as a bundle, and connect them to the same jack lug as the gate pin of the transistor. And be careful when you're doing this to make sure they're staying inside the body of the jack and not sticking out too far. So it's probably worth periodically just taking a quick check with putting the cover on to make sure things are still fitting. Now, this giant hole in the bottom of the jack here isn't going to give us any support with this small wire. So what I'm going to do is use a grommet I have this 1/4 inch outer diameter grommet. It's a little smaller than 1/4 inch, which seems to fit pretty well in this hole. And I'm also going to use a little extra heat shrink over this wire to give it a little extra thickness. That's just 1/8 inch heat shrink, which will make it a little chubbier. That's cool. It actually doesn't fit through that hole of the grommet, which means it'll be nice and tight once I shrink it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Much better. I need to use some pliers here to hold the wire while I pull the grommet down. So that's going to fit really snug. Now before I solder this onto that drain pin, I need to feed this part over because we won't be able to get it on here afterwards. Just leave that on there like that. I'm going to bend back that shield wire to get it out of the way and feed this through. Hit this with a little bit of solder. Before I undo this setup, now's a good time to put that 10K resistor in if we can fit it. Now this bundle of leads will all ultimately need to connect to ground. I'm just adding a little solder to hold them together, and then I'm going to trim off some of the excess. You can see that the jack's cable clamp is actually part of the jack shield, and when that clamps down over this bundle, that's actually just going to do what we need and connect it to ground. But I'm actually going to be kind of paranoid and add a additional ground wire from that bundle and then connect it down here underneath the JFET to that pad of solder I put on at the beginning. And that'll just make really sure that there's a good connection. If that cable clamp gets a little loose, this will ensure that there's a solid ground connection at all times. Add a little solder here just to get it flowing. And now when clamping down on the cable clamp here, just be careful with those Zehners to not exert too much pressure on them because they break pretty easily. So before buttoning it all up, it's worth just doing a little sanity check. Put this in continuity mode. Make sure that the shield has continuity to the resistors, the Zener diode network, and that I don't have a short between the drain and the gate or the source, so they all look good. Now you may want to fill in the body of this with epoxy or hot glue to give it really a solid cable retention. For now, I'm just going to depend on my little grommet and screw it all together and see how that feels. The last thing we need to do is bring in the headphone jack here. Now I'm not going to detail every step and how to solder this thing together because the steps are basically the same as what I showed before. We do need to figure out the white wire here is left and the yellow is right, but we don't know which of these lugs is left and right. So what you'll need to do is take some alligator leads and connect up the lugs to the wires, plug the thing into your iPad and run something like GarageBand where you can pan a track left and right. And then you can listen for which one goes quiet and you'll know which is which. So with the headphones sorted out and the final soldering done, it's time to screw down these jack covers and call it done. So there you go. It's your very own custom impedance matching buffered guitar interface cable for your iPad, iPhone, or iPod Touch. I hope this has been helpful. If you decide to make one, get in touch and let me know how it goes. And thanks for watching.